And when I went back there, it was kind of like being in one of those movies, where they put the scan up on the light board and you're just sitting there going, okay, this isn't my life. This can't be me. So when he put it up there, he showed me where the little shadow was on was in my cervical spine. And it was sort of a hourglass shape shadow. And so it went into the spinal cord. And so right away, I'm like, that's not fixable.
Welcome to Stories of Hope in Hard Times, the show that explores how people endure and even thrive in difficult times, all with God's help. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson. Join me on a journey to find inspiring stories of hope and wisdom learned in life's hardest moments.
My guest today grew up in the Pacific Northwest, where she currently lives with her husband on Camino Island in Washington State. She's the author of a children's book, inspirational short stories taken from her own experiences, and a blog called Finding the Silver Linings While Living with a Disability. After taking early retirement from a 25-year career in financial analysis, she took up writing, horseback riding, or equine therapy, and painting with watercolors. She and her husband enjoy traveling together when they can, and one of her favorite experiences was swimming with the dolphins in Cabo, in which the dolphin actually tried to save her. I'm pleased to present Sue Lamoree. Sue, are you ready to share your story of hope?
I am. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, well, this is so fun. And one interesting fact about you is that you used to be painfully shy when you were younger, and you've had to kind of overcome that a little bit. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, like I said, I was painfully invisibly shy, where I would like to, blend into the walls and not be noticed.
Yes.
If somebody asked me to do a podcast back then, the answer would have been no.
Right.
I couldn't even, if I was in a classroom and somebody asked me what my name was in front of everybody, I couldn't even do it back then. But then as I ended up in the wheelchair, I just couldn't be invisible anymore. So in that respect, I blossomed, not willingly and not to something I expected, but the Lord just kind of helped me get out of my my shyness, out of my shell, out of my own way, which was a good thing, because I always wanted to have more influence in the world. And when I was, hiding in the shadows, that really wasn't going to happen. So
it's interesting, because you wouldn't think that being in a wheelchair would be the thing that would bring you out of your shell. I mean, like I wouldn't say, okay, you're in a wheelchair, now you're out of your shell. Like that doesn't even compute in my brain. So it's interesting that was one of the side effects of the wheelchair. Now, you haven't been in a wheelchair your whole life.
No.
We're going to dive into that story. So why don't you take me to the process of what led you here to where you are now?
This little wheelchair and talking to you.
Yes, both.
So yeah, it was 26 years ago. It was when I literally was when I was turning 40, because I remember one of the doctor's appointments was the day that I turned 40. And so that's a benchmark of, how long ago it started. But it was just a really year-long process of things transpiring in my body, with my mobility, I should say, that we couldn't figure out at first. And that I went into complete denial about. It was so gradual. One of the things with transverse myelitis is that it's usually sudden. It's really sudden. People that I've known or, read about is they usually end up being standing 1 minute and then they fall and they can't get up. And then they,
wow. Now, why is that, Sue? Why is it usually so sudden?
I don't really know, and I don't really know why mine is the way it was. It's neurology, I'm discovering, is, pretty unknown science
Mhm.
still. Even back then when I was going through it, I was new. I was a new to them kind of patient. A lot of the symptoms I went through, they would just diagnose as MS. Um,
Right.
and interesting, my doctor, I don't know why, there was different symptoms that made him say it wasn't, and he didn't uh, diagnose me that way. But I know there's an enzyme that usually shows up in when they do the spinal tap. There's an enzyme that shows up for this transverse myelitis, and I didn't have it in my spinal cord. I think,
Really?
yeah, I didn't have any of the markers for MS or for transverse myelitis. So so anyways, I imagine, as far as answering your question, that that enzyme that might have that creates damage to the spinal cord, and then it sometimes permanent, sometimes not. If you catch it early enough, sometimes it's not, because
Hmm.
it's a inflammation that if you do steroids early enough, sometimes it can reverse the damage. Mine,
Wow.
as I was talking about being in denial, I didn't go through any of the tests and stuff soon enough, so by then it was probably scarring. Um, but anyway, so what I noticed originally was like I would be sitting, on the bus or at work. I mostly remember noticing it on the bus going home from work, that my leg would sort of jump. And I'm like, okay, that's just kind of random, but not frightening. It was just odd.
Hmm.
And it kind of would be with a little tickle. So I'd be like, okay, it I tickled, so that I jumped, and then the weird one was that I started noticing I was walking into plants, on the hallways of work, or I
Hmm.
kind of suddenly be brushing up against the wall of work. I just, unless I was really focusing on how I was walking or where I was walking, I was I was I don't know what you call it. I was veering off. And again, it was something where I was like, okay, I'd show somebody at work, look what I do. This is so weird. I'm walking into walls and stuff, but still, maybe a little bit anxiety producing, but still kind of like, okay, this is just sort of comical. But then I started noticing that when I was walking like distances, my girlfriend and I walk around Green Lake, which is, I think it's a 2.3 mile walk,
Hmm.
and we would go around twice, no stopping, and pretty good. She was really athletic. I mean, yeah, really athletic, and I could sort of keep up with her before all this. But then when I started experiencing these symptoms, I started having to take rest breaks. Just on one, I could only do one lap, and then I started having to. I remember taking like 3 rest breaks, and my legs would just feel like Gumby legs. That's what I called them, was Gumby legs, because they felt like rubber. That they couldn't really support me. And my sister and I would go for walks, as she liked to take walks, and she'd say, Sue, you're walking weird, or you're
Mm,
limping or whatever. And I'm like, I get really I get really put out, because it's like, no,
mm.
I'm not, no, I'm not, because I was really not wanting to have something wrong with me. And then I'd start walking around my neighborhood on my own, trying to, okay, you're terribly out of shape, and
You're trying to justify it any other way, right?
exactly, exactly. And I had been taking some medication for anxiety, because I had been going through some counseling at the time. It was pretty stressful. So I was chalking it up to side effects to the medication. And I even convinced my primary care doctor that that's probably what it was. So we gave it I don't know, 6 weeks or something, to see if things changed after I went off the medication, which obviously they didn't. Um,
Mm,
but anyway, so I think the biggest time was that I really decide, okay, there's something I need to deal with, was that when I had just moved back from the Pacific Northwest. I'd gone down to California for some. I was in my 30s. I was single. I didn't have, all my friends were married, and I thought that kind of stuff. So I thought, I want to do something new. I had some friends living down there. When I was down there for about 5 years, and then kind of decided, I needed to be back with my family, which, in hindsight, with this happening, I was really glad that I'd made that decision. But so I joined the Mountaineers, though, when I came back, trying to find you know, people that had similar interests to hang out with. And I really, really wanted to summit Mount Rainier someday, and just thought that mountain hiking, climbing would be a really fun experience. And I went to the orientation, and they're talking about, well, this is what you have to do for a local hike. You know, this is the endurance you need to have. These are the pieces of equipment you need to have. And I'm just sitting there going, I can't do this. I'm way too out of shape for this. And I was embarrassed. You know, that they ran at all these, most of them were younger than me in the first place, but they were all very physically fit people. And I'm going, you know, I'm embarrassed. I could never do this. And I kind of went out and never came back.
Oh.
But that's when I realized, you know, I need to, you know, look into this further with the doctor and stuff. So,
Wow.
absolutely.
So it wasn't cut and dry finding your diagnosis. You had to be referred to a neurologist before and get like some MRIs, right?
Right, right. The primary care, he did those little reflexology tests on your knees,
Yeah.
and my leg just kind of went swinging out there, you know, and I'm just going, whoa, great reflexes, you know. And
Uh-huh.
he's kind of saying, yeah, I think you need to see a neurologist.
Ah.
And I was like, okay, you know, and breaking down, you know, it's like when I noticed that every doctor's office has a tissue box provided. Um,
Oh.
then they do. I never noticed it before.
But you found out that you needed them, and that's how you noticed
Yeah.
it.
He had about 5 in his office, but that's
Oh.
what I need. Yeah, I went through. I was in tears by then, because it's like a neurologist. That's pretty frightening. And even when I was back taking the walk around Green Lake, I saw a young man walking around with cerebral palsy, and I just had this instinct, you know, that this looks similar to what I'm feeling, and so that just terrified me. And of
Oh,
course,
absolutely.
my girlfriend's like, no, 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 I'm sure that's not it. And I'm, no, no, no. And that's why I kept, you know, trying to build up my endurance other ways. But anyway, so yeah, then the neurologist, he right away started describing some of the um, symptoms I was experiencing. So I thought, oh, good, you know, I'm not going nuts. It's, you know, I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
Now you kind of go, oh, I wish I was.
Right.
But then, yes, he did do an MRI. That was his first test. And when I went back there, it was kind of like being in one of those movies, you know, where they put the scan up on the light board, and you're just sitting there going, okay, this isn't my life. You know, this can't be me. I've been fortunate enough to not experience a lot of tragic things in my life, death of family even, or you know, I haven't even broken a bone in my body before
Oh,
that.
wow.
I, s- I still haven't, which is kind of a miracle in and of itself, because I've made
Yes, it is.
but anyway, so yeah, so when he put it up there, he showed me where the little shadow was on was in my cervical spine. And it was sort of a what do you call it? Hourglass shape shadow. And so it went into the spinal cord. And so right away I'm like, that's not fixable. I mean, even in my layman's knowledge, is like, you can't just cut that off and be done with it, which I'd hoped, you know. I mean, I was even hoping for a tumor at that point that they could surgically remove and I could go on with my life. But no, that wasn't the case. And so he told me, you know, because symptoms were different than he expected, and because it was more of a fluid type situation, he didn't know. You know, he didn't know if it was going to get worse. He didn't know if it was going to get better. The only treatments were steroid infusions. Well, I could have taken prednisone, but the steroid infusions were a lot more impact to the spinal cord at one time. So we did that. And ironically, it was on Halloween. The gal came out. She did I had an in-home infusion thing. And so she had these poles and needles and everything.
Oh, wow. That sounds terrifying to me.
Well, it was, but all I could think of is if anybody comes, you know, knocking on the door for trick or treat, their parents are going to grab them and run, you know. Fortunately, I was in a neighborhood that didn't have kids that knocked on my door. So that we went through that. It didn't do any good. It created a little, what do they call it? Steroid rage, which was my boss was lucky. He survived my steroid treatments. And so the doctor had talked about doing another bit of it. And when I told him about, how angry I felt and stuff, he's like, okay, I don't think we'll be doing that again. Because apparently the steroids can cause, a lot of anxiety and rage and stuff like sports people that have done steroids have experienced. So that was it. And it was, wait and see. And at that time, I was not the kind of person that wanted to know more. So I didn't look it up. I didn't do any research. I just relied on my doctor, who I trusted implicitly. And I was very, very fortunate that the Lord that guided me to him, because he was a really good doctor. Later, I found out that it's similar to cancer, that if you haven't had another episode in 10 years, then your odds are good of not having more episodes. And fortunately, I found that out after 10 years had transpired. So I wasn't sitting there waiting, for 10 years to go by.
Right.
I don't know. There were times, in my prayers and in my experiences with the diagnosis, the Lord kind of assured me that this was it, that it's not MS, it's not going to progress, it's not, things aren't going to necessarily get worse. And I even was talking to a friend, and he said he told his mom about it, and she said the same thing. She, in her sort of promptings, prayers, she said, no, I think this is it for her. So I was like, oh, that's nice little confirmation.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so I sort of, it's kind of like when you get a blessing, you kind of rely on that, and you forget, you get scared and whatnot. And then when you start getting scared, I would go back to that memory and say, okay, the Lord told me, and I know he told me, so I'm going to rely on that. And in the meantime, figure out how to manage what's going on.
But don't you think that's such an important thing to remember when we're going through any hard time, is if you felt peace about it, like
Right.
everything's going to be okay, it just helps remind you that God has got this under control,
Right.
that this isn't a surprise to him,
Right.
and he's going to help you through it. And so remembering those impressions
Right.
are such a key thing when you're going through something hard or tragic like this.
Absolutely. And when you're going through even something less challenging, I kind of go back and say, well, look what he got you through, And now if you're having a bad hair day, it's not that big a deal,
Right?
Whatever. I actually had a heart attack about 3 years ago, and the Lord was just so amazing with that. I was 98% blocked, so it was a pretty serious thing.
Wow.
Yeah, but I didn't have any heart damage. I just, I felt it really a lot of pain. So we called the medics, and we went to the hospital, and they got it, did an angioplasty. But my husband was way more fearful than I was. Let's put it that way. I was pretty relaxed, with the whole thing. And afterwards, I went to church the following Sunday, and everybody's like, what are you doing here? Why wouldn't I be here? I'm fine.
Wow. So it's true that God can bless us with peace,
Yes, absolutely.
even in the hardest times.
Yes.
And it really, to other people who aren't feeling that peace, they're like, why are you reacting so calm?
Yes, that is true.
Oh my goodness.
When I was telling him, okay, we gotta call somebody. It was 2 a.m. with the heart attack, and he's kind of like running around the house like a chicken with the head cut off, and he's got EMT experience even. I'm going, and he's like, should I just call the doctor's office? And I'm like, no, you need to call 911. and they came and helped. But it's kind of funny because you're right. It is, and it is often, I've noticed with having experiences with other friends that have had tragic situations, it's almost easier for the person in the middle of the storm to deal with the problem though than those around, because the one in the middle of the storm knows they need to deal with something. The
Mm,
ones around them don't realize it. And so they can hover, and they, like my parents would hover over me, and they can get a little bit worried. And like my sister, when I wasn't walking right, she was, um, nagging me a lot, and, concern. It's
sure.
natural concern, and grateful for their caring love for me. But it is harder for them to recognize that, okay, I have a loved one that is dealing with something, so I need to learn how to deal with it too, even though
Mm,
they're all Christians as well. And that's what helped me through, was that upbringing in my background. My dad was an amazing Christian
mm.
example for me and stuff. So
That is awesome. Now, one of the things I love that you shared with me before was that you talk about finding blessings in disguise
yeah,
when you're going through a thing like getting diagnosed with transverse myelitis. Um, what were some of those blessings in disguise that you were able to find?
I can honestly say they're just really numerous. Um, I think I wrote in there, told you a little bit about the seeing things a little bit more with the glass half full now than I used to probably do. Uh,
Yes.
but they were just all over the place. But the big one is that I met my husband, um, because I was in a wheelchair. I wouldn't have never met him if I was going to this equine therapy that I listed as one of my favorite hobbies now. And that in itself was a huge miracle, because I didn't even like animals before that. And
Wow.
yeah, now I'm a horse lover, a dog lover. I have a parrot. I have. If I, if I could have more, but my husband won't let me because he has to take care of most of the stuff and me. So so I started horseback riding. I wanted to do something a little more outdoorsy. I wasn't necessarily a huge athletic person, but I liked hiking. I liked snow skiing, water skiing, uh, bike riding and stuff. So I thought about doing the ski for all, which is a really amazing program. But I didn't end up doing it because I just thought, you got to go way up in the mountains. You got to really make an effort. And so when I was actually looking at vans for driving around with the wheelchair,
Mhm.
well, no, no, actually, it was before that I watched The Horse Whisperer. And I thought, I wonder. And I didn't even, I'd ridden horses before. They tried to brush me off on the trees. So it was an interesting prompting. But what was interesting is then when I looked into it, there was a facility 20 minutes from my house.
Oh, well, that's a miracle right there.
Exactly. And not only that, but now this particular facility, it's in Seattle. Was Redmond technically, but it's a huge facility now, and they often have a really long waiting list. But back then, it was like 23 years ago. They were just getting started, and so when I called, they said, "Yeah, when can you come in?" And I was able to get fitted. Well, the funny part was that I went there after work, and she said, "Well, you ready to get on a horse?" And I'm like, really? No. So they, did an assessment of my capability of sitting on a horse, and I was kind of a white knuckle effect the whole entire time. But I fell in love with it, and I still do it. Yesterday was I do it closer to home up here in Camino Island now, but it's amazing physical activity and um, what would you call it? Emotional support for by having lots of friends that are in similar not they might be in similar situations, or well, it's usually kids of the kids that are dealing with issues, but or the staff, are just always saying, yeah, you can do this. Whereas when you go to normal physical therapy, they say, well, no, you can't walk again and you can't do this again and whatnot. And I'm sitting there going, well, can I be a real cowgirl? And they're like, yeah. I literally said that once. So
That's
trying to
awesome.
ride it independently, and it's a challenge every time I change horses. The one I'm on, I just adore her, but she's got a lot more motion, so I'm still working on getting that independence again. But anyways, so in that regard, when I was there, my husband started volunteering there, and I kind of just pass him in the hallways and stuff. And then I saw him once at an auction and kind of went, okay, that man's
Mm.
kind of good looking. So then we, after that, we eventually started dating, and he was a good kindred spirit, a Christian, and so we hit it off. We're married within 6 months. So that was
Wow.
a huge blessing in disguise.
Yeah, you never would have expected something like that to come from it. So I'm just curious, what are some of the benefits that you have seen from riding horses? You mentioned the social support that
Yeah,
you
so
get to get out and interact with other people. What are some of the other benefits?
well, it's kind of funny for me. After I started it, it actually was kind of my whole life. Almost everything that happened in my life was I was impacted. The name of the therapy place is called Little Bit. Almost everything was impacted by things from Little Bit. I mean,
Mm,
the dog I got was somebody at Little Bit was raising dogs, and
mm,
I was terrified of raising a dog. Especially in my condition. But I kept seeing this little puppy, and some of my stories that I've written, my short stories, are about these things. So that's
mm,
another part of it. Is that with this. By having a relationship with Guy, I wrote a short story about that. By having a relationship with the horses, I wrote a short story about the horses, the dog, all these kind of things. I've got a little book that I wrote about a pony that is a friend of mine and his little true adventures. So that part of it was there. And then like you said, the social environment was there. I made all kinds of friends, similar to what I was kind of hoping to do with mountaineers. Where they understood where I was coming from. They were supportive. And then physically, it's hard when you can only do it once a week. You don't get as much physical benefit, but you get
mhm,
fun. The horse's movement is similar to when you're walking. So when you're on it, your hips kind of move the same way that the horse, well, they do move the way the horse moves. And it mimics that motion for your body.
mhm,
But the other thing I found for me personally, and I think it happens with a lot of the little children that go out there, is that I want to do better when I'm riding the horse. So some of the physical exercises that I would rather not do at home, I am more motivated to do. Um,
mm,
Lately, I've been doing more because I want to get independent again on Sapphire is the name of my horse. So I started using it's an arm bike that you can use to do more of an aerobic exercise, which I was told I should be doing after my heart attack and wasn't very diligent about it.
mm. But you're motivated to do it now because you
I
have a
am.
reason to.
I am. It strengthens my arms. It helps my core. Because with being what I'm called as an incomplete quadriplegic, the because it's my cervical spine, it affects everything from there down. But
Mm,
my legs, I don't, they're gone. I can't walk. I can maybe wiggle some toes on one foot, but the my arms, I have some use of. My hands are pretty limited, and that gets frustrating. One time, a friend of mine who was a quadriplegic, we were saying, I'd just be happy even to be a paraplegic instead of a quadriplegic. But whatever, we
yeah.
all have our mountains to climb, right?
Yes, we do. Oh my goodness. We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we'll have Sue tell us a little bit more about the lessons she has learned through having transverse myelitis. Hi, this is Tamara K. Anderson, and I want to share something special with you. When our son Nathan was diagnosed with autism, I felt like the life we had expected for him was ripped away, and with it, my own heart shattered as well. It's very common for families to feel anger, pain, confusion, and anxiety when a child is diagnosed. This is where my book, Normal for Me, comes into play. It shares my story of learning to replace my pain with acceptance, peace, joy, and hope. Normal for Me has helped change many lives, and I'd like to give this book to as many families as possible. We've put together something I think is really special. My friends and listeners can order copies of my book at a significantly discounted price, and we will send them to families who have just had a child diagnosed with autism or another special needs diagnosis. We will put your name inside the cover so they will know someone out there loves them and wants to help. I will also sign each copy. You can order as little as one or as many as hundreds to be shared with others. So go to my website, tamarakanderson.com, and visit the store section for more information and to place your order. You can bless the lives of many families by sending them hope, love, and peace. Check it out today at tamarakanderson.com and help me spread hope to the world. And we're back. I've been talking to Sue Lamoree about the things that she has experienced coming down with a condition called transverse myelitis that has impacted her and brought her from being completely normal and standing to being in a wheelchair and being an incomplete quadriplegic. Now, Sue, what are some of the lessons that you have learned because of transverse myelitis?
Well, it's kind of like what we talked about at the beginning of this sort of blossoming effect that I had through this process. It's gradual, all these lessons were kind of gradual, and you kind of look back and say, wow, I used to be there. And like, for instance, with the being less shy part, it started when I was still walking. I went for quite a while still walking and being, again, in denial. So I wasn't using a walker or a scooter or cane or anything that would have benefited me. And so when I was walking around in downtown Seattle trying to get to work, the wind was blowing and all that, I was pretty precarious. But when I would first be walking across the street or doing something and getting stuck, I'd get stared at, or I'd get like some guy behind me is like, are you going to go? And, people downtown in rush hour, they don't care who you are, or what you're doing. They just want to get to their destination. And
Sure.
At first I was really bitter. And I remember one time these two cute little girls were looking at me and kind of staring at me. And I just kind of gave them a mean face. I look back on that and think, what the heck was I thinking? That's just awful. But as time transpired, I started learning to be more gracious about things, learning to accept help, learning to, smile when somebody stared at me, whatever. And what I started recognizing is that I didn't see myself handicapped anymore. And then when nowadays, people don't see me that way when they're, and I forget when they say something, when a stranger says something about my wheelchair or something, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what they see is a person in a wheelchair. Like my mom even said to me, when you have a nice big smile on your face, that's what they're noticing, not the fact that you can't walk or whatever. And so that's one of the things I learned was to be more gracious, and that helped me open up more to being, more out there and visible.
Yeah.
A lot of people would ask me questions about my disability because they were struggling with something, and then sharing with them was becoming a real joy to me to be able to help them with their experiences. And so that again was making me more visible. The other one I think was that I learned very quickly that the Lord never abandons us. Never, ever, ever. And I was fortunate enough to be raised in a a Christian family to recognize that. So when when something like that happened, instead of turning away, like is easy to do for some people, to say, well, wow, he's, not there helping me, then he must not be real or whatever. If I was turning to him more and more and more, and was seeing his hand in everything. Even the night that I came home from with the diagnosis, I was still a single person. I was living by myself. I was still trying to provide for myself. And my biggest fear wasn't as much about, well, definitely about being completely paralyzed, because I didn't know all the resources available to people in that circumstance, but also that I would be so bogged down by anxiety and depression and stuff that I wouldn't be able to function at work and, be
Oh,
able to
sure.
eat even, So
Yeah.
that very night and I had been a person that had dealt with anxiety and depression already in my life. So that was, paramount in my mind. But that night I went to bed and my sister said she prayed for me, but I, of course, was praying all night long and sobbing and being afraid and, praying some more and that kind of stuff. And I remember just lying there kind of in a curled up position all night. I had something I'd committed to the next day that was going to require taking care of a little child, walking around the zoo, which I really wanted to do. But I was like, how am I going to do this?
Mm.
And I just pictured the Lord holding me all night long. I didn't sleep. I mean, I never fell asleep. I kept hoping I would, but I never did. But I did feel peaceful. I could feel his arms around me in a way, just feel that level of peace that we get when we turn to the Lord, technically on our knees, in, I can't think of the right words, but trying to really pray with our full heart.
Right.
And the next day, I had a really fun time with this little girl. We unfortunately didn't take a stroller, so I had to carry her quite a bit of the time.
Oh, wow.
Well, my niece ended up coming with us too, and so we took turns carrying our little girl around. But it ended up being fine, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I ended up, getting through the rest of my life with this hanging over my head and all the tests I had to go through and stuff like that. And I also I realized that, well, it's kind of the thing with my husband. He doesn't answer our prayers the way we expect.
That is so true.
Or the timing we expect. But when I look back, it's really funny because now when people approach me, I've had a lot of time to get over the whole, 5 levels of grief and all that. But
Yes.
I've got a little blog about that. But when they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry this has happened to you," and I'm like, I'm not. I don't even know how to respond. It's like this has been an amazing blessing, an amazing journey. I have felt joy like what I'm experiencing now before this. It's between all the things that the Lord has opened up my eyes to and the connections that I've made with people, the experiences I've had. I joke that I used to say, when I'd encounter something, for instance, a small thing. I was trying to get to a physical therapy appointment. I needed to go to use the restroom, and I needed to get out of there quickly. But I needed, the wheelchair accessible stall. And when I went in there was a young girl in there changing her clothes. And it took forever. She was a girl working there. She was an intern, not an intern. She was just a temp person, and she didn't care. She didn't care that there was a person in a wheelchair needing to use the restroom,
Oh, no.
A little sweet time about it. So when I got to the physical therapist, I was like, so I had another adventure today. And so that all those little inconveniences or falling on my face, and one time I fell on my face and I had, injuries on my face, my knees, my hands. bloody little bits, and I needed to go to work. And I worked as a financial analyst, and we were having a meeting with a client. And
Oh,
I
no.
went there thinking, I looked like my husband beat me or something.
Oh, no.
Or that was what I was more worried about, is that I looked like somebody beat me. But those types of things I started calling adventures. And when I looked at it that way, instead of calling them challenges, but adventures, I also started seeing that, I said, my life used to be really, really boring.
Mm.
I go to work, I go home. I didn't like to be seen, so I didn't do a whole lot of things, maybe read a lot, had a few, activities with friends, whatever. But now my life has always got adventures, and it just is more interesting.
Yes, it is. Oh my goodness. So would you say then that was it God that helped you turn from being bitter to
Mm,
shifting your perspective to looking at things like adventures and seeing things in a more positive light?
absolutely. I think that first of all, it is part of the grief process. You go
Mhm.
through the stages of anger and loss and all that. I mean, you need to go through that, and I don't want
Yes.
to invalidate that, because those things are a necessary part. Otherwise, you just push them down, and they're going to come out in other ways. But yes, the Lord. What I started noticing walking around downtown and having the challenges with the wind, or like there's a lot of bums down there. One time there was a bum kind of harassing me and stuff, and I'm just trying to walk away with him from him, and I can't walk, and my legs would get stiff. I had a bad tone in my muscles, so before I got this other baclofen pump, I would be like stilt lady trying to walk around. And this woman in that case came up and just said, "Hey, can I help you? Can I walk with you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, please do." And so she
Oh.
walked me to the bus stop, or if I had challenges getting to the restroom in time at work, because I was on one side of the building and the restrooms were on the other side of the building, and it's a block
Mm.
long building. Um, Friends from work would help me get there to the restroom. By then I had a walker with the seat, so he'd just sort of pull me along with the walker.
Oh, how cute.
But there were times like that one time when I was in a windstorm, and then the buildings just funnel the wind right through there. I was just
Oh.
in the middle of the street. I couldn't walk. My umbrella was inside out, and I was getting drenched. And I mean, the light had turned red, and I'm watching these cars thinking, will somebody please get out of their car and help me? Because I don't know what to do. And this
Mm.
guy came along, this gentleman, came along, and I don't even know from where. He was just next to me, took my elbow and sort of ushered me across the street. And I looked up to say thank you, and he was gone. And
Wow.
I swear to this day that he is an angel.
Mm.
I swear every time somebody helped me, like get across the street, or take me to the bus stop or whatever, I eventually learned that I needed to do something different. But in those days, I was like, okay, I had another angel in my life today, and that was one of those things where I started saying, okay, here's the positive in this day. you know, there's
Mm.
always, I mean, there were people too that wanted to push me over, get around me, but there
Mhm.
was always someone or something positive to look at in a situation or a day. So I started really noticing that I was becoming a more half full kind of person.
So we kind of got off on that fun little tangent, and I'm so glad we did. But you were commenting before that God rarely answers our prayers the way we expect.
Yes, thank
How
you.
have you found that to be true in your life?
What I've noticed is that he knows the desires of our hearts. And
Mm.
I think when we pray for something, we know what we want, and we don't always know what we need. And I think a
Ooh.
lot of times our wants get in the way of our needs. And this is only because of, retrospect, that I can look back and say, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't really realize I needed to wait a little bit longer to do this. I didn't, you know, realize that I knew that, for instance, with my husband, that I was gonna get married. I just knew God had somebody special for me. But I had always hoped to have children. I had always
Mhm.
hoped to be young enough to have children and raise a lot of children. I even wanted to adopt them and stuff. I wanted to be a teacher, and I never ended up becoming a teacher. I went into finance. So after all this happened, I met Guy. I was 50 at the time, so there weren't going to be any children involved. But then I started getting callings in the church where they, give you responsibilities that the Lord calls you to do. I was first called to young women's to be a teacher for young women's, and I'm just going, "Are you sure about this? I'm new to the church." But on the other hand, I also went, holy cow, the Lord really knows that I've always wanted to be a teacher. I've always wanted to be around children. And it didn't happen for me in the way I expected it to. Um,
Mm.
and I didn't expect to be in a wheelchair when I met my husband. But you know what? Being in a wheelchair, I met a man that was full of care and compassion,
Mhm.
supports me with every single thing I do. And then on the other hand, I also ended up being, teaching now I'm mostly in primary, which I absolutely adore. I love being in primary, teaching little children. And especially during this COVID time, I've been sending out little challenges and stuff for them. And I've actually found, here's another example, that with this time of being apart from each other,
Mhm.
we're actually getting closer
Mm.
because I've been staying in touch with each of them individually and as a group, and trying to, help them recognize that the Lord's in their life, even with all this stuff going on. So down to the basics of what I started with is that he knew those desires of my heart. He
Mm.
knew that I wanted to buy a condo and I didn't buy one. And then when I finally did, it turned out I was not able to walk. Thank the Lord I didn't buy one with stairs. I was
Mm.
buying one with elevator and all that kind of stuff. I remember telling my mom, because she was like, wondering when I'd ever get married and stuff. And I said,
Uh-huh.
Mom, I know that just like the condo I got, that God's got this perfect man there for me. And he did,
Mhm.
but we're always still learning together. It's not like a bed of roses. I hate to paint.
No.
I don't like painting that picture because you look around sometimes at other couples and you think, why can't I be more like that? We
Mhm.
we work on this together. He knew I was in a wheelchair when we got married, but he didn't know the responsibilities of taking care of somebody in a wheelchair.
Right.
And there's times when we do a lot of laughing, times when we get angry with each other, and then there's times when we take a break and say, okay, how can we do this better? And
Mhm.
he's a real fixer kind of guy, so he wants to fix everything. And that's kind of where it's challenging for a man to uh, accept some of the physical challenges because they want to fix it. Like my dad wanted to
Yeah.
fix it, and you just can't. But anyway,
Right.
those are the kinds of things that I feel that the Lord really.
And I love how you phrase that God knew the desires of your heart. And
Mm,
and so sometimes he may not answer with what you're asking specifically, but he's
right,
answering with what you need.
right.
And it's beautiful to see that you have been able to see that. Of course, it's always retrospect, right?
Right.
But that's wonderful. Now, let me ask you this. Have you found a favorite Bible verse along your journey?
I, it's funny because when you asked that question, I said to myself, well, not at that time, but there's a favorite Bible verse that I've had all my life
Yes.
that I think gave me that strength at that time, and that was Joshua, was it 24:15,
Yes.
and it's not all this stuff about it. It's the as for me and my house, I will serve my God, or whatever it is, the Lord. Um, it's that part. I don't care about anything else. I don't care about the blessings and the rewards. I just feel this great desire to serve the Lord. And by doing that in anybody's life, serving others, serving the Lord, it gets us out of ourselves, and we can then get past our sort of temporary temporal problems, which are, big, but not necessarily easy to shrug off. However, they are temporary, and there is an eternal perspective to keep our eyes on, and to know, that, okay, one of these days, like my mom, when I was baptized, my mom was sort of in tears because the mission president talked about, one of these days, I'm not going to be in this wheelchair. I'm going to be, riding those horses up there and playing with those dogs. And in my opinion, I'd like to be playing with bears and lions too. But we have that eternal, this is just a blink in what we are experiencing eternally.
Right.
And so every time we can keep that, and I also felt more productive, the sense of productivity instead of, oh, woe is me, why'd this happen to me? And also the Lord has really big shoulders. So when I was in that midst of why does this have to happen, I never was, why does this happen to me? Because I don't want it to happen to anybody else.
Right.
But I was, why does it have to happen? And then I kind of pictured my friend in this counseling group I was in said something about beating her fists on the chest of the Lord or whatever. And I pictured myself doing that, like sobbing with Jesus and saying, why? Well, then you go on to say, well, gosh, he had something way worse than I did.
That's true, right?
So he knows, he keeps those tears in his bottle, and he knows everyone and why everyone is shed for our, I look at things I now shed tears for, and I think, gosh, this is just so silly. It's not that big of a deal, but it breaks my heart right now for whatever reason. And he knows that. He knows that, and he loves me for that. And again, back to the Joshua verse, I'm so grateful that my father was similar to Joshua, as far as how he raised me, how he experienced pancreatic cancer, one of those cancers that is very terminal. And just watching him go through that, I mean, he would literally dance to music and say, I get to go home pretty soon.
Oh,
it was pretty amazing. And my mom, my biological mom passed away when I was about 2.5. And of course, I don't remember that, but my grandpa always told me the story that when he was in the hospital room with her, she said, tell Bert, which was my dad, that Jesus has come for me. So I lived with those beliefs and that faith and have never wavered. I mean, yeah, I might have been like what other people talk about and their, the other prophets and say, I had to get down on my knees and I had to repent because there were times in my life that I didn't actually act godly. And I definitely say there were times in my life that I haven't done that. But my faith never wavered.
Well, and it's amazing that that was your verse, that no matter what, I'll serve God. And and it sounds like he tested that a little bit. Yeah. But it's amazing that you've been able to keep the faith through all this, and he has helped you through it. And that's the beautiful thing about relying on God.
Right.
So let me ask you, what books or other websites would you recommend to somebody who either has transverse myelitis or maybe some other challenge that they're facing right now?
Well, with the transverse myelitis, there are 2 websites that I follow. One of them was beattm.com. It's a great website for just resources, experiences other people have. Also, wearesrna.org is another TM website. They've changed the name, but it shows all the research that's being done in regard to neuro conditions. And then one of the things that I think is really important to let people know is that when you're in a wheelchair, clothes don't fit you the way they do when you're standing up.
Oh.
So I found some websites through some of these other ones that actually make adaptive clothing.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, for one thing, when you're sitting, you really want a shorter top because they don't that they get caught under you, or they, I don't know. You also, when you're sitting, you end up with a little bit bigger tummy than you would want because of sitting and not having the muscle strength. So I get kind of boxy fitting shirts when I can. And they make them that way. And then they have pants that when you're sitting, your pants end up getting short because you're bent at the waist, you're bent at the knees. So they make them a little longer.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. Well, this one, it's actually a German one, but I got some jeans from them and I loved them. And so these pants that they made, they actually are shorter in the front, and then they bring them up higher in the back, so you're not showing things off in the back when you're
No,
and then,
that's really cool. So what is the name of those specific adaptive clothes? Where can people find those?
well, one of the places I was really surprised is Tommy Hilfiger. They have
Oh.
adaptive clothing, and it's not just for that, it's for somebody that can't do things. They have like magnets on the shirt, so you get like an older person that can't do buttons, or me that
Oh.
can't do buttons. Just they go on in the back instead of the front, things like that. So they've got a good line. Zappos has an online store, and they carry different brands. I found this out actually because my sister did work at Children's Hospital, and a young man named Billy came in, and he designed Billy footwear. And what it is a shoe has a zipper, so you can unzip the shoe, and then you can put your foot in it and zip it up. And
Oh, I may need to get those for my son with autism. That would be
yeah,
awesome.
they have I think they have a little, I don't have any because Guy just puts my shoes on, but they're cute too. And they even carry them at Nordstrom's. But you can look on Billy Footwear, I think it's billyfootwear.com. The other one was the one in Germany. They have some nice jeans. That's called rollymoden.com.
Okay, rollymoden.com. We'll
Yeah,
be sure to put links to all this in the show
yeah,
notes just so people can find it and see it.
right.
And you also mentioned there was a book by Dr. James Dobson, When
Yeah.
God Doesn't Make Sense, Holding On to Your Faith During the Hardest Times.
What my memory of the message I got was that regardless of we're in good times or bad times, he loves us. And
Mm,
like that footprints in the sand, if he's not walking next to you, he's carrying you.
mm,
It's hard to feel that sometimes. And that's where those kind of books or anything like that is helpful, is to remind us, like you said about the promptings and stuff, to remind us to go back to that sense of faith and support, that we know that God's there for us, even if we don't see it or feel it. So that's my memory of how that one impacted me. He's a really good writer too.
yes, he is. Yes,
He's,
he is. And The Road Less Traveled by Dr. M. Scott Peck.
my memory was, it was sort of saying, we were, especially probably in the United States, raised to think that everything should just be a smooth little ride through life. And then when we hit a bump in the road, it's like, oh my gosh, what the heck do I do now? And
Mm,
he pointed out, no, it's kind of what we've been learning and growing up, is that we're here to learn lessons, and we're
mm.
here to learn about adversity and how to deal with trials, and easy read kind of thing. I did a lot of it when I couldn't sleep at night or something, that I would just read these easy to read, but also positive messages. He's
Yeah.
got another one called Further Along the Road Less Traveled that I read also. And he admits in that one that he was more focused on his beliefs in God in that one than he was in the first one,
Hmm.
which is kind of neat. But
Because he was further along the road less traveled.
exactly, I agree with that. I'm sure.
Funny how your perspective changes the farther you get through life.
Yes, it is. It's very true.
Oh my goodness. Now, there's going to be people who will want to connect with you or read more of your short stories because they've heard your amazing story here today. Where can people find you online?
Well, I started a blog about 3 years ago, and it's on my website. Anyways, it's in keeprollingon.co. All one word, keeprollingon.co. And then it's got direct links to the books and stuff that I have in there. Life is not easy,
Yeah.
regardless of what our challenges are. And it's nice to have someone else that has that's like-minded, that or has similar experiences, or can help you in my situation, when you don't end up in the hospital from it, you don't know what your resources are. And that's where I, at one point, was in the hospital, and I ended up in rehab. So I learned a whole bunch of things about where to look for and how to deal with things at home on my own. And instead of having your dishes way up high where you can't reach them in the cupboards where you're normally used to them, put them down here in this little drawer down here where you can reach them. Or, I don't know, they put elastic shoelaces on me so that I could just stretch my shoes on and off instead of trying to tie them. And I have these things, wonderful things, they're called leg loops, or I call them leg loops. They go around each of your thighs. And then when you're lying down, for me, it's when I'm lying down, I want to move my legs, bend them.
Oh, you can help, your hand helps move them.
Pull
Yes.
them. Yeah.
Oh.
To me, they were like, I spent however many thousands of dollars in the hospital. Like, those leg loops were worth it,
But you learn tips and resources along the way. And I think that's one of the cool things that is such a critical tip anytime you have any kind of diagnosis is talk to other people, talk to the specialists, talk to those occupational therapists or the physical therapists or the horse, the equine therapy. Find people that know more about those, and they will give you so many tips and tricks and, go buy this, or there's adaptive clothing you can get. And it's just so helpful if you're willing to just open up and let yourself learn about a new diagnosis, right?
Yes.
That is one of the other things is we don't have to go through this journey alone.
Yeah.
There's other people to help us, right? That
Absolutely.
not only those angels that you talked about before, but also look for the specialists that can teach you more and give you those tips and tricks that will make whatever diagnosis you have easier to manage, easier to handle.
And I would just throw it out there real quick too, is that, like, when I was first diagnosed, I was going to a sports therapist. They know nothing. These ones knew nothing about spinal cord injuries, but they were close to home and they could help me with some physical therapy. Find somebody, if you're in a neurological situation, spinal cord injury of any kind, find a therapist that deals with those injuries. They are amazing.
There's a lot out there. I guess your message then is don't give up hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder what podcast we're in.
I know, right? Well, Sue, this has been such a joy to talk to you. You are just positive and uplifting, and I'm just so thankful that you've been willing to share such a powerful story. And you've really taken us through. Yeah, there were times you were bitter, but you've come around and God has helped you find the positives and learn to roll with the punches a little bit more. And you have found joy in your journey. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's show. If you like what you heard, subscribe so you can get your weekly dose of powerful stories of hope. I know there are many of you out there who are going through a hard time, and I hope you found useful things that you can apply to your own life in today's podcast. If you would like to access the show notes of today's show, please visit my website, storiesofhopepodcast.com. There you will find a summary of today's show, the transcript, and one of my favorite takeaways. If someone kept coming to mind during today's episode, perhaps that means that you should share this episode with them. Maybe there was a story shared or a quote or a scripture verse that they really, really need to hear. So go ahead and share this podcast. May God bless you, especially if you are struggling with hope to carry on and with the strength to keep going when things get tough. Remember to walk with Christ, and He will help you bear the burden. And above all else, remember, God loves you.